How's it going, my bakers? Welcome back to another episode of Principles of Baking. In today's video, I'll be answering a question quite a few people have asked me. Which flour should I use in a preferment? And I've been wondering about it too, so let's go to the kitchen and have a closer look. So let's say you have a bread recipe which consists of more than one type of flour. Which flour do you pre-ferment? Should you only pre-ferment the white flour, the whole wheat flour, or a mix of both? And that said, any other type of flour that may be contained in that recipe. I've been wondering about this for a while. Usually I think I use the whole wheat flour in the pre-ferment, but I had never tested this side by side. And that's exactly what we're going to do in today's video. We'll make 3 breads. They will all contain exactly the same ingredients and exactly the same amounts of those ingredients. And they will all be made with the same method, using a pre-ferment. The only difference will be the use of the flour of that recipe. The one on the left will have 100% white flour pre-ferment, and then the main dough will contain white flour and whole wheat flour. The one in the middle will be made with a 100% whole wheat flour pre-ferment and only white flour in the main dough. And then finally the one on the right will be made with a pre-ferment that contains 50% whole wheat flour and 50% white flour and a mix of white and whole wheat in the main dough. We all know how much flavor whole grain flour can add to our bread. It really packs a punch, and you don't even need to use that much of it. Of course, pure white flour breads can also taste amazing, if they are handled and fermented correctly. The flavor profile of each bread is mostly influenced by 2 factors, the flour choice and the fermentation of that flour. Speaking of whole grain flour, it contains a lot of bran, which means it contains more nutrients. Using whole grain flour essentially gives the yeast more food, and that can result in a more rapid fermentation. In the case of these pre-ferments, they all contain the same amount of water, so they all have the same hydration. And we know that whole wheat flour absorbs water a lot better than white flour does. The whole wheat flour pre-ferment and the 50-50 one are essentially drier than the white flour one, and we can see a clear progression between them. The white pre-ferment puffed up the most, the 50-50 came second, and the whole wheat one was the smallest one. It certainly doesn't mean that it fermented less, it just expanded less. These 3 are all well fermented. I left them out for 12 hours, but I really wanted to see a big difference between them, so I decided to leave them a little bit longer. But this time not at room temperature. I decided to refrigerate them for another 8 hours. And this is what they look like after they were done. They're all slightly collapsed, but that's totally fine. They are still nice and strong, and they will bring far more flavor to our final bread. Now we can move on to making that bread. Again, the process for all 3 will be exactly the same. We're mixing water, yeast, salt, the pre-ferment and the remaining flour. Then we'll go to bulk fermentation, folding, pre-shaping, final proofing and baking. I have been using the no-knead method for the last few episodes of the Principles of Baking that I filmed. You have not seen those episodes yet. What I'm trying to say is that by not kneading my bread dough, it cuts out another variable. It means that I can get more even results between the breads that I'm making. Temperature control is a nightmare when you're trying to knead 3 or 4 doughs in a row. The last one always comes out too warm, because by that time the table has warmed up. So I will definitely keep using the no-knead method for the Principles of Baking videos. And I have also filmed a dedicated video about this method. In that video, I will show you how to turn any bread recipe into a no-knead bread recipe. As it turns out, kneading your bread dough is quite overrated. Of course, in a second here, I will contradict myself. I kneaded these doughs just for a few seconds each, for an obvious reason. The pre-ferments were quite stiff, so mixing them properly into the dough without kneading was impossible. But if you are using a high hydration pre-ferment like Polish, then you can easily mix it without kneading at all. Okay, we are ready for bulk fermentation now. During bulk fermentation, I will give all these 3 doughs one fold. Because I didn't knead them properly, I must build some tension in them somehow, and folding is the best method for this. And that is the main trick for making no-knead dough. Instead of kneading, you just give it a few folds. In a lot of cases, only one fold is sufficient, just like in this recipe. Now it's the first time I'm handling the dough since I mixed it, and whilst I'm giving them a fold, I can tell you that all 3 feel exactly the same. None of them is looser or stickier than the other. They are identical. As you can see, they are puffing up identically too. Okay, bulk fermentation over, let's give them a quick pre-shape, leave them to rest, and then do the final shaping. And once more, handling them feels exactly the same. I was hoping there would be some kind of difference, but I guess so far, it doesn't matter which flour you pre-ferment. You can see me using dusting flour once in a while whilst I'm handling the dough. It is slightly sticky, it has a hydration of 70%, and the fact that part of the flour is pre-fermented makes it even stickier. And that is also why I'm using the stitching method for final shaping. This is a great way for shaping loose dough. First, flatten it, fold the bottom up, cross the two bottom corners over in the middle, then fold the top down, stitch the sides up and roll it up. You can find a detailed video about various shaping methods in the Steps of Baking playlist. Okay, final shaping done, let's clean down the mess. They do look slightly different. That's an inconsistency in my shaping method. The one on the left is slightly longer and thinner, whilst the other two are slightly taller and fatter. But that won't change anything in the end. Let's leave them for the final proof now. And of course, they are still fermenting at the same rate, as you can see. I really do hope there will be some differences in the end product. Perhaps their crusts will have different characteristics. Maybe the whole wheat flour in the pre-ferment resulted in a higher concentration of sugars in the dough, and perhaps that will make the crust brown slightly better. And if not that, I really hope they will at least taste different. Okay, let's give them a quick spray and bake them up. And there they are. I will take them out the tin and leave them on the rack to cool down properly. 24 hours is what I left them for. Because warm breads can taste quite similar to each other. I will only really be able to taste the difference once it's cooled down properly. And that goes for any bread, not just for comparison videos. It will only taste the way it should taste when it's cooled down. Okay, so it's time to compare them. And obviously the crust color is exactly the same. Pressing all the breads also feels the same. Looking at them from the outside, I cannot see any difference. Yes, they puffed up and expanded differently whilst they were baking, but that is of course not because of the flour that we used in the pre-ferment. That's because how I slashed them. Slicing them also feels the same. When slicing bread, you can really feel what the texture will be like. Without even tasting or touching it, the way the knife runs through it gives a lot away. Even after laying the slices down next to each other and pressing them, they all feel the same. They have exactly the same softness. Tearing them also feels the same. None of them resist more than the other, or at least not as far as I can tell. So far, they are all identical. We can only hope for one difference from now, which is the taste. And finally, there is a difference. Eating them one after the other like this, I could feel quite a difference between them. But when I came back and took another bite from the white flour pre-ferment bread, that is where I really could taste the contrast. The white flour pre-ferment made a much milder bread, and naturally the 100% whole wheat one had the strongest flavor. And the 50-50 was a mix of both, of course. So the answer to the question is yes, it definitely matters which flour you use in your pre-ferment. Using whole wheat flour really improves the flavor. In this test, it improved nothing but the flavor, and that is certainly a good enough reason for using it. So what are your thoughts on this? Which flour do you use in your pre-ferment? Was the answer too obvious? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this one, click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.